Reverend Denver, and just introduce yourself briefly to our guests, to our viewers.
Thank you, Brother Oscar. Thank you, Brother Oscar. My name is Denver, and I am a pastor, reverend, under the Pentecostal Assemblies of Zimbabwe, and I'm based in Bulawayo. Greetings to you all in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Thank you, our panelists, for introducing yourselves. Apologies once again for, looks like I did not come right in terms of showing our screens on Facebook. Though we are live, I'll figure that out as we go. But nevertheless, we are going to go on with our discussion, and I am doing a recording on Zoom. So if you don't come right with the Facebook, we'll still upload the Zoom recording onto Facebook. But if you can hear us, nevertheless, you can still ask questions as we move in, with our discussion. So, gentlemen, what has brought us here? We are dealing with a very, or should I say somewhat controversial issue, the issue of hate, which shows itself in different forms. Racism, xenophobia, discrimination, just to name a few. But what has brought us here today is, as we are going through the pandemic of the coronavirus as the world, from the time it started, we have seen a lot of hate. The coronavirus, of course, started in America. In China, my apologies. It started in China, and we saw how the president of America reacted, and we have seen how the Asians have been treated, and we have been now seeing how African migrants have been treated or are being treated in China because of this coronavirus. But not only that, we have also seen how the Africans have reacted to this by attacking Asians in African countries. Pastor Tari Sibanda, you are in China, you are based in Beijing there. Maybe it would be ideal for me to begin with you, since you are in Beijing, in China. What have been your experiences with regard to what we are talking about today?
Thank you once again, Oscar, for the opportunity. And like you rightly said, yes, we have a virus that we are all talking about, scared of, the coronavirus. But if you look at what's happening in the world right now, it seems as though the greatest virus or the greatest threat to humanity is not just the coronavirus, but the hate virus. It is this this discrimination, this the hatred, the xenophobia. So, as you rightly say, this thing started in China, and when it started in China, many people at first kind of just looked at it as a China thing. There were many videos that were shared on social media, attacking even like the Chinese people, just saying, well, these people are eating bats, these people are doing all this. And even some of them were trying to travel. The whole world was like, no, stop them. Well, which is actually understandable, because that's the best way you can contain the virus, by stopping people that are coming from the epicenter from going to all the other parts of the world. But what we ended up seeing, like you rightly said, is that there were other Chinese or Asian people that were in other countries, in the States, in Africa, in Europe, that were now treated as though they were the virus. And some of them had not even traveled to China at that particular time. They had not been like to Wuhan in a number of years, some of them. But by virtue of being Asian, people just thought, no, you are bringing corona here. And they really pressed a lot of reaction. And like you said, there was that reverse racism again, when China seemed like to be containing that thing, when other people are now trying to go to China. And so that's the whole thing that has been happening. And right now we are seeing it everywhere. And it's not just about Asians being attacked, but Africans are being attacked. Other people are being attacked. As long as people think that maybe you're coming from, places where there is the virus, people just react like, no, we don't want anything to do with you. And so, yeah, that's basically what has been happening.
Thank you so much, Pastor Tari. I would want to state that our objective today is to see how practical it is for us as Christians to be peacemakers, because the Bible says or calls us to be peacemakers. But this question, I am directing it to Pastor Jabu. Can we say the coronavirus has caused all this hate, or is something that was just waiting to come up?
I mean, you know what? Everything that comes out is what has really been put in. That comes out of a human being that has not been deposited there. For us to understand that we are a product of our environments, we are a product of our spheres of influence. As Christians, we know that we have been made in the image and the likeness of God. And one of the most important aspects of that is the fact that we have the faculty of the mind, which is both all of our information, whether it be our memories, whether it be our interaction with the current environment. But our minds is one of the number one most important factors that make us like God. And that's where our imaginations are formed. So whatever that comes out of us is a direct reflection of God. And most of the time, the purity of what comes out, or what comes out without any pretension or without any interruption, it happens most of the time when we are under pressure. And when we are under pressure, the substance of who we are is what will come out as a way of protecting ourselves, as a way of navigating whatever difficult situations we're facing. So it's not the coronavirus that has caused it, or that has resulted in any manifestation of any violent behavior towards any particular group of people. It is nothing but a reflection of what has already been there. If you look at the Bible, I mean, one of the strongest points that God makes early on is about man's imagination. When he brings in the flood in Genesis chapter 6, he talks about the man's imagination that has gone very evil. And he talks about how he will no longer, in Genesis chapter 8, 19, 20, how he will no longer act based on man's imagination, because his imaginations are wicked. So there's a constant, throughout the Bible, there's a constant theme that addresses the mind, the imagination, which is the mindsets of people. That we have to be extremely careful what comes in, because what comes in is what comes out. So this hatred is not corona, this hatred somewhere down the line, we can talk to that a bit later, but somewhere in the spheres of influence, the foundational spheres, which is the relationships, the family structure, that's where they picked it up. Perhaps it is in the environment, where in the environment there's some kind of a code that they all agree on regarding certain people who come from certain places, and they talk about those things, and the more that they get exposed to those kind of perceptions, the more they get cemented in their minds. And when they find themselves in a situation of pressure, when you don't have proof, contrary to what you know, you will act on what you have been told. And let us face it, a lot of people in China do not have as much exposure to Black people. I mean, it's a very small minority as far as the population is concerned. And maybe Terry can back me up on that, or maybe contradict, I'm not really sure. And then, of course, institutionally as well, I mean, there are certain institutional structures and ideologies that get put into people that maybe make them think that they are a certain way and not a certain way. And as I say, just like with gold, when the popo hits the fan, when the pressure is on, what will come out is what has been deposited.
Wow. It is indeed more than the eye, is more than what meets the eye, as Pastor Jabu has said. Pastor Jabu, from what you are saying, it looks like it's complicated, isn't it? Because you have spoken about the institution of racism. You've touched on a number of issues, and right now, I think a lot of Christians who are watching or listening are asking questions like, okay, but why now? Why is it coming out now? Maybe I'll just ask Pastor Denver to answer that, but we'll come back to you, Pastor Jabu, to elaborate more in terms of, okay, how then should we deal with this? Is it at an institutional level? And I remember talking to Pastor Tari, mentioning that we need to be sort of creating platforms for us to address this issue. And yeah, we need to find out also from Pastor Tari, in terms of, okay, what can we do? But this is for later. But for now, Pastor Denver, what's your comment on what Pastor Jabu has said?
Wonderful. There's a lot of things that Pastor Jabu has said that
Yeah.
are
We
very generic. I think the issue of hate is generic. It's not peculiar to Christians, and therefore our responses must also be kind of generic in a sense that our solutions must come in a way that we all can abide to what is happening. So bringing it back to the issue of imaginations, I thought that was a very powerful contribution from Pastor Jabu concerning the imaginations of men. And one of the things that have definitely been manipulated is the imagination of men, and that is through media. Pastor Tari mentioned a brief story of perhaps an Asian experience of the Wuhan virus. But if you look at what is on the media, it may be contrary. And if you listen to the U.S. president, it may be contrary. Why? Because our imaginations are being influenced by media, and therefore it's going to fuel either the hate or it's going to fuel racism. And we may lose track of what actually is the problem at the end of the day. But bringing it back to what Pastor Jawu said is that whatever is happening right now is a deeper problem of human nature. And acting without proof, I thought that was also a powerful contribution also from Pastor Jabu. Issue of proof. We don't have proof or first-hand knowledge except for media. And we know that media has got an agenda. For instance, right now, if you look at the Arabs, much of what we think about the Arabs is that they're terrorists. But it's because of media. So, but when we look at Arabic nations and how powerful they are and how most of them are kind, we may lose sight because media tries to show us that Arabians, or should I say Muslims, are terrorists. That's the power of media and the power of imagination being manipulated by the information that we'll be getting. So all that can influence our imagination. So I believe, like what Pastor Taria said, that we must go into having proof. We must think beyond what we see and be able to discern the times and understand how to respond to these issues. That's my comment for now.
Thank you so much, Reverend Denver, for that great contribution. We are going to take a 2-minute break because our time is run out. We'll come back shortly, but we'll take a 2-minute break. So don't go away. If you are listening on Facebook or watching us on Facebook, don't go away. We just want to take a 2-minute break and then reconnect again. So don't move away from where you are. Team, I will send you. Yeah, before we went on break, Pastor Denver, you touched on a number of things, reiterating to what Pastor Jabu had said, the issue of acting without proof, and also the influence of media on us. And from what you said, it looks like media is propagating hate. Of course, from what we heard from Pastor Jabu, is something that is already in us. But I would like to ask Pastor Jabu to kind of elaborate more on the issue of acting without proof. A layperson there might be difficult to understand what you are saying, but I would want you to maybe explain in layman's terms what it means.
All right, okay. In simple terms, I mean, you know, let's face it. A lot of the lives that we live, we're living vicariously through other people. What do I mean by that? I mean that we don't, by virtue of us being limited as people, we're not like God. We're not everywhere present. We don't have all knowledge. We don't have all understanding. So what that translates into then, it translates into the fact that we need each other's experiences, our own common experiences, to share with each other the worlds that we are part of. And yes, we depend on each other as far as information is concerned. And so media is an important part of that. The institutions that we're part of are an important part of that. The relationships that we're in are an important part of that. And a lot of times, yes, we're acting without proof. We're acting on the word of our parents, we're acting on the word of our friends, on the word of people that have been in other places. Right now, we're talking to Pastor Tari. He's out there in Beijing. We don't know what's happening in Beijing, but he can tell us what's happening in Beijing. That's what I mean. And right now here in the United States, I can tell you what's happening here from my side. You don't know. So you depend on me to sort of know what's going on here.
Okay.
And you guys can tell me what's happening in South Africa. So I can say certain things about what's happening in South Africa without proof based on what you're telling me.
Mm.
So part of the way that we're designed, therefore, we are designed then to act based on faith. Or what is faith again? Faith is the substance of those things which are hoped for and the evidence of things which are not seen. So it's no wonder that as people, we're acting without proof. We are designed with an ability to hope in the things that we don't see based on information that we have in our minds that has been given to us by the institutions that we trust, the people that we trust, the various sources that we expose ourselves into, such as the media. And so that's what I mean. That's what I mean. So that's part of what it means that we are people of imagination. We store up information so that we don't have to learn every single time the same things we had learned before. That's why we have an ability to have memory in our cognitive capacity. We deposit information, so we store information so we can remember and bring back information in the present. All right, now you can imagine, therefore, if in the Chinese environment or in South African environment or whatever, let's just talk about hate in general of other people. a lot of the times it is based on misconceptions. It is based on information that has been told either by their parents, either by the environments that they're part of. And if that information is negative and it is a possible threat on their person, then they will develop some kind of a defensive way of thinking of those people. So you don't think of those people from the point of, they're safe. You are constantly suspicious and wondering, when are they going to strike? When are they going to, when are they going to be what I've been told they are? So you are constantly having that. Your mind is framed, therefore, and highly sensitized towards a certain behavior. So if you see anything that remotely resembles what you have been told, you're going to pounce without proof, except only the information that you've been told before. And not only in China, but let's talk about the Chinese situation right now. A lot of them that were acting, if you think about it, the virus came from China, right? It was from Wuhan province and from the Chinese scientists. We don't know what the story is as far, but we know that at the very least that it originated from China. And now all of a sudden, in a situation that is highly pressured, where they have to defend themselves, they sort of like that, they divert their attention now to Africans. We don't know what information they have about Africans, what Africans are. In spite of the fact that in terms of the numbers, Africa is probably the least affected of all the continents in the world of the virus, but all of a sudden we are the carriers of the virus, and all of a sudden we're the ones that are reinfecting, we're the ones that are actually receiving the tip end of that fear. And we see that it is being run from institutional level, and they're not even thinking, questioning it twice. For the most part, at least from what I've seen, they were just complicit to whatever recommendations that the government was telling them on how to treat Africans in restaurants and in the accommodations and all sorts of things. I know I've said a lot of things, but let me keep it at that.
Indeed. Thank you so much. But now the question is, as we of course we're referencing to China, what has happened because of this coronavirus issue, and we all agree that this is something that has been there. But my question now is this going to end? Is this going to end, Pastor Terry? Are we wasting our time just talking about this thing, or is the issue of hate going to end? Coronavirus will end soon, but is the issue of hate going to end?
I think, like what the other speakers said, this is a deep-seated thing, and we just need to be able to identify the root of this, because otherwise we will be just chasing ghosts and blaming each other, pointing at each other. And the moment we see ourselves as victims and other people as the perpetrators, then there is no way we can end this thing. But when we realize, like what the other speaker said earlier on, that this is a human problem, as people we tend to protect people who look like us. So when in the face of any threat, what we want to do is that we always want to think that maybe the other people are the problem. Now, just to comment a little bit on the issue that was raised here about the Chinese in Guangzhou and how they were treated. I thought I was saying earlier on, in the video that I posted earlier on about being peacemakers, that sometimes we work with what we see, but we fail to understand why it's happening and how it all started. And like the other pastors say, media has got a huge influence in this. Now, let me just shed light a little bit here, especially on the issue of Africans in Guangzhou. Number one, it's not that maybe this thing that happened in China happened everywhere across in China. I'm in Beijing. There's nothing like that actually happened here. I can just go to the malls, I come back, I can go anywhere, I can get into the subway, no problem at all. But now when we talk about that issue in Guangzhou, it was an isolated issue. And like I said, I don't want to try and justify it or defend it, because that was purely wrong, just seeing people outside. But what happened there was that there are a group of people that came on an Ethiopian airline to Guangzhou, and they were quarantined. And then afterwards, they started now eating. They were eating in one restaurant in Guangzhou where they were frequenting. It's like an African restaurant. And now they later on realized that the owner of the restaurant tested positive. And just like what happens in every country, when someone tests positive, you start now tracing the contacts. And so now they ended up realizing that that place was frequented by Africans. And so now they started now to then now find those Africans to say, let's test them as well. This is what happens everywhere in the world. But now for testing, they were actually called. We've got Zimbabweans that are there that we're talking to. They were called, they were informed that we are coming to test you. And then they were told that they were supposed to check out even like their passports. And then, because now they really couldn't tell which African went there, but they just knew that it was like an African sport. And in the African community called Xiaopei and another one called Baiyun, many Africans started testing positive. Actually, in total, they said there were 111 Africans that tested positive in that small community. And so now what happens is that you end up now just thinking, well, maybe this thing has spread further than we can contain. So now let's trace all these people. But now that was around the time that media was telling us that there's vaccination, that whatever, against Africans, there's 5G, there's all these things. And so now when they were called, come for testing, others now began now to resist because they were like, we did not travel. What exactly do you want to do? What do you want to do with us? And with other people, they actually wanted to see their passports. And passports, it happens again everywhere, because with passports, you can actually tell now someone's travel history. Did they leave? Did they? But some of our people as well, there were others that did not have proper documents. They had expired. And sometimes out of fear, they end up now trying now to dodge the police. They're trying now to dodge. Not everyone was like that. Others were really cooperating. So it would be very wrong to say that maybe all Africans were like that. No, others were cooperating. Others, they had proper documents. Others were okay. But now, because there were others that were now kind of dodging, police now ended up realizing that they were losing the battle. They asked all of them to say, please stay at home, self-quarantine for 14 days. And they wanted now to kind of like just try and test. But then others broke that rule and they went out. Now, when they went out, before they finished the testing of the Africans, what happens now? People now began now to speak about it. There are people that are just going around, here, and some of them are positive. And now they cannot tell who is positive and who is not positive. So the nature of people then, when they see now an African coming, they'll be like, hey, maybe this is the one who's positive. And so what happens? They all just close their doors. And so now they had like all those papers, call the police, whatever, like in restaurant, because they really didn't know. And some of them were not really cooperating with the police. And so now that's exactly what happens. And just lastly, in Zimbabwe, we had a situation like that. Maybe Pastor Jabu may not know, but in Zimbabwe, we had a situation where a person from Thailand traveled to Harare. And the person was just a suspected case, not even confirmed, suspected case. And he was taken to Wilkins so that they could be tested. And now we heard that the person escaped from Wilkins. And now there was an uproar. There was an outcry in Harare. And everyone was just like, what's happening? Where is this person? Now, I want you to imagine if there were 10 people or 20 people of Asian origin who looked Thai. Everywhere where they went, people now would be suspecting, is it the person who ran away from Wilkins? And even in Africa, even the Africans in Guangzhou, there was actually a case where they said 2 of them had escaped quarantine. And so now people were kind of like just closing off, go to the police first, get tested, and then that's the whole issue. And some of the landlords now locked the doors because it was as if like these people had broken the quarantine rules. They were supposed to stay in, they went out. Now they closed, you cannot come back in. And that's how now we had that particular situation. Was it right by the Chinese? Definitely not. The way they did it, the way they handled it, it was definitely not right. But what was pushing it, it was just a fear of what they had had. There were Africans that had tested positive that were roaming around the streets. And so for them, they were just, it wasn't that they were saying Africans are the one that brought Corona to China. Media now are twisting the whole thing. That was not the story. The story was that there were Africans that have tested positive, but we cannot tell who they are. But they're everywhere, they're roaming around. And so people were just afraid. So that's the situation that happened.
Wow.
Wow.
Master Tari, thank you so much for bringing in that side which we don't get from media. And now I understand what Pastor Jabu meant about acting without proof. Wow. Pastor Denver, you've been quiet for a while. What's your comment with what Pastor Tari has said?
I think there's a lot of things that go with what Pastor Tari has said, and it's all coming back again to the issue of proof, and the institutions, like what Pastor Jabu has said, that there's certain institutions that we trust. And if I get information right now, we got information from Pastor Tari, but I from as much as it is so convincing from his perspective, that's exactly how media will also portray their own side of the story, right? And like what I'm saying, that it's going to come back to what is the other trying to prove, because again, it's not just an issue of human nature, but there's institutions that are involved here. The institutions that are involved, it's not just families, it's not just countries, it's nations, it's propaganda, it's secret societies, and people that are trying to push their own agenda. Now, in a time where there's pandemic and chaos like this is when now those secret agendas begin to rise up. This is a time that is best to push your agenda. Let's say, for instance, I mean, I listen to, I don't subscribe to conspiracy theories. But there's a lot of conspiracy theories that are going right now that are trying to prove that, China is up to something. They want to take over. There's economic war. Right now, if you look at how Australia is also pushing the agenda of, suing China and the South Sea, the fuel, the what, all those things are just an indication of the human nature. It comes back to this issue of hate, but it then manifests in different ways. And racism will never end, unfortunately, because as long as we're people and we're different, it's not going to end. But what we can stop is the injustice that comes with a person's hate. I don't mind if you hate me, but we are still living in the same country. You can hate me, but what's important is, what do you do when you after the hate? Do you try to kill me? Do you try to attack me? Do you try to? That's where the issue is. That is wrong, right? And right now, if I were to analyze Pastor Tari's story of the perceived discrimination that is happening in China, in Guangzhou, and you look at West African countries that have responded by doing such things, it shows you that there's a problem, right? However, I would like to challenge one of the things that Pastor Tari said, that, whilst I agree with the issue of victims and trying to avoid, I forget the exact term that you used, but it was one to do with perpetrators and victims. I think that this is where the issue is, and this is what steers up what is then labeled as hate, because there are people that are asking for accountability, right? And because of that seeking for accountability, this is where now these theories come in: racism, political agendas. I'll give you an illustration. Right now, the president of America, President Donald Trump, he wants accountability from China because his story is this was something that he believes was made in a lab. And therefore, he's going to push his agenda of, I want accountability. Australia says the same thing, they're suing, or what was the other nation? Italy, Spain. They want accountability from China because the story is that it was made in China, or it started off in China, or in a test tube. All right, now let's bring it back. There's another person who will say this was just a virus that just started by people eating bats. The way that information will then inform a decision and accountability is different. If somebody said this was made in China, then I want accountability from China. But if I believe this was just a virus that started, and I may be sympathetic to the Chinese people and caution them and say, please, let's not eat bats. But if I say this was made in a lab, then I'm going to take a different approach, right? So the issue of accountability, bringing people to account for what they've done. So our West African brothers that have done what they've done, we should also be brought to justice. Why have they done what they did to the innocent Chinese? Let's forget about if they don't have any recorded, let's say, if they have not broken any laws of whatever Western country, a Chinese must be treated with respect, as well as according to whatever foreign policies that they've got. They must be treated in accordance with their laws that are in that land. But if a Chinese has been abducted and basically discriminated, arrested just because of what's happening in another nation, then by all means, that nation must be brought to account for what they have done. So my point being, hate, we can never stop people from hating other people. We can't stop racism. We can't stop xenophobia. But what we can stop and what we can call for is accountability, even through the institutions that were mentioned. If there's diplomats that can be able to go through and diplomatically speak to these nations that are committing such things, then so be it. That's what needs to happen. So that's how I would look at this.
Yes, thank you so much, Reverend Denver, for that. You spoke about a number of things, and you spoke about hate and justice. That you can, I didn't know that there's. It's possible for someone to just hate you but live together. Is that what you're trying to allude to?
Yeah, I believe that people can hate each other but still live in one nation. Look at
maybe
there's laws that govern the way we live. If you don't like me and you're racist, you hate me because I'm black. You can live where you want to live, and I can live where I live, and we can avoid breaking the law. But if you are going to hate me and then do something about your hate, that's where the issue is, that I should hold you accountable for what you've done to me. So in a time like this,
Reverend Denver, here is my challenge. There's the concept of othering, where we look at other people different from us, and that has created the concept of superiority and inferiority. So with what you are talking about, is it possible? Is it possible for us to live together equally when there is so much hate and without segregation, without inequalities? I would ask maybe Pastor Jabu to try and attempt to answer this question, because you just comment further. You spoke about accountability at the institutional level as well. Is that possible? Can we see that happening in our, for example, give in our country, South Africa here, Pastor Jabu?
You know, I think this is what we don't sometimes consider. Now, let's quickly have a look at what institutions are meant to be and why it is that we are institutional as people. Institutions are supposed to implement, first of all, they use pragmatic approach. Now is they look at what are the working established practices that have a sort of predictable consequence, a predictable result. So if you think about education, for example, or if you think about governance, which is about the law and order, if you break the law, you become a lawbreaker, and if you become a criminal, and then you go to jail. So the institutions bring in that predictability that we need as part of our need for certainty. Why am I mentioning the need for certainty? I'm mentioning that because of the fact of fear. Like when we have no certainty, if we cannot predict what's going to happen next, we tend to be fearful. And one of the reasons why we become fearful is because we are aware of our limitations as people are, about how minute we are in comparison to the rest of the world. I mean, think about a small virus like this that can bring the world into total disrepute the way it did. It just reflects the fact of our finitude, and we know where that comes from. The Bible tells us very clearly where that comes from. And part of being fearful as people is that then if other people are being portrayed as a possible threat on our person, it's not so much that we hate them, it's that we fear them. And because we fear them, then we can tend to have emotions that are not so friendly and warm towards them. And if, because hate in itself is, you know, I think a lot of times hate is a strong word. I think it's like it's a manifestation of fear of the other person. And as a result, you use distance to put up walls around them to protect yourself, and you can even use aggression towards them as a way of protecting yourself against the perceived threat. To talk back to your point about othering, Oscar. Othering is that somebody tells you what the other, or a situation tells you what the other person is like, and especially in relation to who you are as a person. Because you must always remember, a lot of these racial discussions, a lot of these perceptions we have about each other, they're about not only about how the person is on their own. It's okay, like, you know, we have animals out in the bush. We don't have any problem with them. The problem becomes when they become part of our environment. Then that's where the problem is. That's when we have to protect ourselves. And the othering concept is that the theories about what other people are like. And then when they get to be in our sphere, when they get to be in our environment, then all of a sudden we are so heightened towards the possible threat that they could be to our person. And then we'll we'll come up with a strategy to protect ourselves, because there are two ways we respond. There are several ways, but I'm going to discuss two ways that we respond to a possible threat. We eliminate it, and if we cannot eliminate it, we try to minimize the risk that we are exposed, or that they expose us to. We either eliminate or we minimize the risk. So institutionally, the institutions that we've been a part of have tried to minimize the risk, for example, of whatever they perceive as a threat from other people, like Black people or Chinese people or whatever the case may be. Now, the same people, if you take those same people and put them in these institutional structures, will they be accountable? If you take people that are from broken environments, that are biased towards a particular person, are they going to use institutions to serve the interests of everyone like they're supposed to, or are they going to use institutions to serve their own interests? Because every institution is run by a person or by people. If those particular people do not have they don't account to something higher than themselves. Let's think about us as Christians. What makes a Christian want to love a person that they don't know? It's because there is a command. There's a command that is higher than themselves, which is from God, that to love your the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself. This is not something that is a man's idea. It's something that is a God idea. And when you were a Christian, you subscribe to that transcendent law, which is over your material, laws, your dogmatic experience, your dogmatic principles. Now, in institutions where there is no transcendence, in institutions where there is no clear definition of what a human being is, in institutions where the value for a human being is linked to their productivity, is linked to their gender, it is linked to their geographical origin, if it is linked to their education or the economic, welfare, whatever the case might be, can you have proper accountability for that life, towards that life? And I want to put it out there that with this discussion, without God, without people, without institutions accounting to something higher than themselves, and especially how they define what a human being is, because I believe that's central to our discussion. What does it take to be? Well, what is a human being? There's a problem. And for me, if I want to just take one more point, is that I think for me, it's very difficult to place full trust, for example, on the media or in institutions, and think that they can be wholly accountable to even the same constitutions that they put together, because they're supposed to be the custodians of the constitution and implement the constitution as it is laid out for the rest of everybody. But we have seen it. It's not a Chinese thing only. It's not an African thing only. Right now in the United States, there are interesting things that are unfolding. Looking at how many different officials have flouted constitutional laws for their own personal interests, using institutional arms, whether it be the FBI or the CIA or whatever, for their own personal means, with absolutely no accountability to the office themselves and to the Constitution, except only for their own personal gain. So what you see, what we call hate, is nothing but self-interest, self-centeredness, and it is also a disregard for another person. And I think that one of the reasons why we disregard other people is because we don't have a definition of what being a human being is outside of our own dogmatic definition.
Well, thank you, Pastor Jabu, for that. Yeah, it makes us realize that we all have a responsibility to play. But now the question is, where do we go from here, Pastor Tari? Where do we go from here? You and I, we are just ordinary Christians with less power to influence the powers that be, in terms of some of the things that Pastor Jabu was talking. Of course, he referred to sort of the aspect of having a relationship or a link with the higher power, who is God. But where do we go from here? We're running out of time. Pastor Denver, what are your last remarks? Where do we go from here?
Well, thank you very much, Brother Oscar. The way to go, I believe, and what I would recommend, is to become a person who pursues peace. And like the speakers have said before, let's filter in the information. What informs our decision must be truth, and truth that transcends even human beings. And that, for me, would be what the gospel has already taught us, to become people that pursue peace and respond according to peace. But let's also not be naive as Christians to believe that everyone has got the best intentions for us, because self-interests will always be there. So let's invest in methods and measures. Like nations right now, what they're doing is they're preparing. If you look at the United States, as much as there's a lot of diplomacy happening, but they're still readying their armies and putting defense mechanisms so that they're able to protect themselves in the event of war. And we know that the Bible tells us that wars will come. Jesus did predict that these things must come. So Christians must be ready for war. And you must be ready to face challenges from people and perpetrators that will try to take your life. So let's be prepared and let's not be naive. Those are my last comments.
But now when you talk of war, you're talking of fighting. I'm sure. Well, thank you so much for your closing remarks. Over to you, Pastor Tari, your closing remarks.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I would like to see things a little bit differently, especially as believers. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 8 to 9, the Bible says, "Finally, all of you be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate." And then it says that, and be humble. Do not repay evil for evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, that's what the Bible says. On the contrary, repay evil with a blessing, because to this you were called. And I believe that as believers, we must be people that are able to shine the light. I think it was Dr. Martin Luther King who said that hatred paralyzes life, but love releases it. Hatred confuses life, but love harmonizes it. Hatred darkens life, but love illuminates it. So as believers, we must be that light that is able to illuminate, what hatred is trying to darken. We cannot try to say, well, we're fighting and therefore we are just going to fight back. It's a matter of trying to be a peacemaker. And what it means is not, I'm not saying that it means that you just become like a peacekeeper and allow people just to torment you while you're just saying, well, I'm just a peacekeeper. But a peacemaker, it basically means that you actually go further than just being peaceful. You go further than just being peaceable to saying, what can I do to reconcile myself with those people that are at variance with me? Now, there are other people, of course, that maybe you may not really convince. There are other people that, they've already made up their minds. It's difficult to convince, but let's do what we can do sometimes to calm down the fears of people. And the reason why people hate us or whatever, it's because of, like we all said, it's because of what they had. It's because of what they feared. It's because of their concerns. So what can we do as believers to calm their fears down? What can we do to calm their concerns down? Let me just close with this example. It's something that happened to me just, I think, 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. Now, after this whole thing of this coronavirus here, there were now cases where China managed to control local infections. They came up with a system that when someone is infected, they let you know. My neighbor just right across here was coming from another place and he was a suspected case. They put a notice on his door to tell me that this person is a suspected case and he's on quarantine. They even put like the date that he cannot go out until the 14th of April. So what it meant was that all of us knew that this person is supposed to be in quarantine. So there was no way that he could go out. And these are some of the measures that they put across to protect their people, to protect everyone. And this is a Chinese person that I'm telling you about. So now they managed to control that, and there were less local infections. But now they were now worried about imported cases. So now what happened was I called, my internet was down. I called China Unicom to send someone to come and fix my internet. So now the person came, and this is what happens. When someone comes, they normally want you to put on the mask, and then they ask you if you have traveled, if you have whatever, so that they also see that they're safe. So this guy did not expect that it was a foreigner, but I was already given his number. I had added his WeChat, and I chatted with him, but he did not realize because we were chatting in Chinese. So he came to my house, fixed the internet, everything was okay. Now, when he left, what happens was he made a mistake. He sent a message to a friend saying that, oh, when I got there, it was a black person. I was really scared. And for him, it was kind of like, I was scared because, I don't even know if maybe he had traveled. So the friend had asked him to say, do you know if he was here or he had traveled or he had whatever? And so now he sent the message by mistake to me instead of sending it to the phone. So now I saw the message. At that particular time, I wanted to react. I wanted to shout. Actually, I wanted to even report him to say that this guy is, and I knew what was happening. But something that I just remembered this story about, peacemakers and everything else. Actually, that's how I did the first video. Then I told myself, what can I do differently here? Then the guy quickly noticed, he recalled. Then I texted, and then he texted me saying, sorry, I wanted to find out if you had traveled. I forgot to ask you that. I want to find out if you had traveled. Then I was like, no, I want you to know that I did not travel. I was here the whole time. I was also on lockdown. And then I was like, let me calm his fears. Then I was like, I saw your message. I know that you were scared, but I did not go anywhere. And then he was like, oh, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to say that. And we spoke. I was like, no, it's okay. I just want you to know that I understand your fears. I understand your concerns, but it is well. Sorry, I'm taking long. And then he apologized. Then I was like, I forgive you. Everything is okay. Then afterwards, he was like, please, if you need any help with the internet or anything else, please don't hesitate to call me. And what I did at that particular time, I proved him wrong with what he expected I was going to do. I could have reported him. I could have, done it. He realized that my reaction was completely different. And now when I was now trying now to connect, I bought a new router. When I was now trying to connect, I realized that I was failing. I remembered this guy had fixed this thing for me. Then I just told him, then he told me, I'm not at work, but someone may charge you for this thing because it costs like for someone to come. Then I was like, it's okay, I can pay, just recommend someone. You know what he said? He said, no, I will not allow you to pay any single cent. What I'll do, even though I'm not at work, even though I'm at home, I'm going to go on video and I am going to show you what you need to do to connect this thing until it works. He started helping me out. And then at the end, we are now friends with this guy. So at first, he had these fears. If I shouted at him, we could have just stopped like that as enemies. But now I decided, okay, I'm going to be different. I'm going to show him love. Even though he made a mistake, I'm going to forgive him. And now we are friends. And now I've won a friend by just, reacting differently. So that is my last thing, that as believers, sometimes we must just learn to react differently. People step on our toes and expect us to react back. But the moment we react with love, we surprise them, we shock them, and we never know what happens. People are one that way. Jesus, you remember, with a woman who was caught in adultery, he responded differently, and the story changed for that woman. I'm not saying that we should just let people step on our feet or do anything, but I'm simply saying that love has got power. It has more power than what revenge can do. And that's what I wanted to say.
Wow. I feel like clapping hands. But thank you so much, Pastor Tari, for that.
Sorry, I took too long explaining this, but yeah, I just wanted
to actually making all of us realize what it means to be a Christian. And I don't think we'd want to leave this place without maybe allowing you to say we are called to be peacemakers in Chinese. I don't know what Chinese language you say, but if we can have the of you, do you think it's okay?
I'm actually trying to think how to properly say it in Chinese.
Okay.
Speaking while I'm trying to think the right word.
All right, we'll come back to you. Pastor Jabu, your closing remarks.
Pastor Tari, that was amazing. I mean, that's really so. Again, just looking back to the importance of getting the the truth. I think what I like about what you just said is that it talks to my point that the most powerful weapon that God has given to us, the most powerful force that God has given to us is love and truth. The relationship between love and truth is very clear in the Bible. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 16, we speak the truth in love. And then there's also the relationship between grace and truth. The Bible tells us that Christ came to bring grace and truth in John chapter 1 and verse 17, that he was full of grace and truth. And then also there's the relationship between grace and wisdom. And in Luke 2, verse 52, about Jesus Christ growing himself in grace and in wisdom. Why am I bringing those scriptures? Those scriptures are very important because they give us a framework, of that relationship. That as Christians, Christ, of course, the Bible tells us that we are called to love one another. This is the number one distinguishing factor from other people, that when we love one another, we are truly the disciples of God. Even goes one further to say that bless those who persecute you and pray for those who are, bless those who hate you and then pray for those who persecute you. So we are really called for a ministry of reconciliation. And I think that as Christians, we have to really choose what our weapons are going to be. To quote back again Martin Luther King, he says in one of his speeches that I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have a final say in the end. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have a final say in the end. The question you're going to ask yourself is, what does that look like for you? For a person like myself, it looks like the call that I have as a pastor to love people and to spread the gospel, but also as a mindset development specialist, to diagnose and to look at what is wrong with our thinking, what is wrong with our lives is our thinking. That it starts with the seeds that get deposited in our minds as the soil, and how we germinate that minds, how we enrich that minds. Those are our minds is the most important thing. What are we allowed to get in? If we don't have solid proof on certain things, it might behoove us. It may benefit us to stand back and say, I don't have enough information to react or to have an opinion about 1, 2, 3. Maybe if it means something to me and it really gets me emotional in a certain way, maybe I should get more facts about it. Like I just got more facts right now with Pastor Terry about what happened in China, and all of a sudden my perception has now completely changed about what happened in China, him being there and him having experienced what has happened there. As an African, when I saw what happened and some of my own perceptions about the relationship between us and the Chinese people, I was already on a different bandwagon. But having sat down here and then having listened, I'm like, oh, look at that. The mindset specialist has just been proven wrong himself in these things, and I think that's a very important part of addressing and of remedying the fact that we are limited beings. Because we're limited beings, we have to grow. And part of our growth is that we have to be open to knowing and to hearing the other person, to hearing what the experiences are, to hearing what their version is. Because fear for that Chinese guy that walked into your room, Pastor Terry, is the same as my fear sometimes, even when I drive here in the States, when I hear about the relationship between African Americans and the police. To give you a very simple illustration, one time I was driving and then I stopped, and as I stopped in the evening, there were 2 sets of lights that like really were bright behind my car, and then as I was trying to figure out, there was a knock on my left side, and there was a police guy with a torch into my face. And as I turned around and talked to him, then there was another knock on the other side. There was another torch on my other right side into my face. And the first thing that came to my mind was that, oh wow, it's happening. I'm a black male. I'm driving now in the United States at night, and here are 2 white cops. They've stopped. They just came to my car and they asked me questions. The first thing that came to mind is that's funny. The first thing that came to mind is I don't want to remind them of any African American that they know. So I put up a very serious British accent. I put up a very British accent, and I instantly told them that I'm not an American, that I'm from South Africa. And then I reached my passport, and then I told them that I'm going to reach my passport. My friend told me, if they stop you, just put your hands on the steering wheel and look forward, and just whatever you're going to move, warn them beforehand that we're going to do it. So I told them, officer, I'm going to reach for my passport. It's in the cubbyhole. And he said, okay. And I did that. And then they saw that I was South African. But in that moment, though, I was also fearful. And in the end, it worked out. In the end, there was no hostility, and then they walked away. But at that moment, I was fearful. And fear for all of us is the same.
Yeah.
Fear can cause us to react rather than respond, right? We can react rather than respond, and those are 2 different things. I'm not going to go into that now, but you can think about it yourself.
Wow.
If you're acting from an emotional point of view, you are reacting, but when you are considering all the facts and what the next step is going to be, you're responding, and that tends to have a much more calmer, much more controlled manner, and much more human, and much more peaceful human emotion attached to it again, you know. And just one last thing is that peace is a fruit of love. In Galatians 5:22, the first fruit is of the Holy Spirit is love, then joy, then peace, or is it peace and joy? But those two things are together. It's a fruit of another, and we have to choose as Christians. What is our weapon of choice? How are we going to use the truth?
Wow.
Is it going to be truth and love? How are we going to use wisdom? Are we going to use wisdom to condemn? Just wisdom with truth, but wisdom with truth without love can be very manipulative. You know, truth
Wow.
has to be surrounded by both grace and love,
Mm.
and
Wow.
be led by wisdom.
Wow. Wow, thank you so much. It's actually getting exciting as we're coming to an end. And I wish we had started with this talk that you two have given. Wow, thank you so much, Pastor Jabu. And thank you so much, Pastor Tari and Reverend Denver. Reverend Denver is being lost connection. But we have come to the end of our show, Talk on Point, where we discuss issues as they are and as they are supposed to be. And I'm sure tonight you have learned what it is supposed to be when it comes to the issue of hate. We are not supposed to hate one another. We are supposed to be peacemakers. We are supposed to love one another. But above all, one thing that I like the panelists stressing is the issue of our relationship with the higher being, God. If we do not subscribe to the higher being, it's not possible. Thank you so much once again to our panelists.
That Chinese word, sorry. That Chinese
Oh yes, sorry, Pastor Terry, I'd forgotten to come back to you just to, yeah.
Peace in Chinese is 和平, that's peace. And then now, peacemaker is 和事佬. So now, if you say that, let's be peacemakers, you say 我们都应该是和事佬.
Wow.
Thank you.
No. You messed it up.
With that, we've come to the end of our program. So good night and God bless you all.
Thank you so much.
Good night, guys. Thank you. Thank you, Oscar. Thank you, pastors. Thank you, Pastor Terry and Denver.